Sarajevo, a city which over the centuries has been called the Jerusalem of Europe, a symbol of multicultural and ethnic unity where those of Muslim, Catholic, Orthodox and Jewish faith live together. But in April 1992 it became another symbol, one of the tragic wars that erupted when Yugoslavia broke apart and nationalism and ethnic hatred pointed its guns to this city. For more than 3.5 years, Sarajevo was under siege. The Bosnian Serb army surrounded the Bosnian capital. Civilians became open targets for the snipers. When the siege ended in February 1996, more than 11,000 Sarajevans had been killed. Many more were wounded and displaced. Sarajevo, like Bosnia and Herzegovina, was increasingly divided along ethnic lines. These photographs of Sarajevo during the siege are part of an exhibition at the city's museum. It shows how Sarajevans lived during the war. Because they were surrounded and because of the UN arms embargo, not only was defending the city difficult, but also getting food, water and electricity were all part of a daily struggle. But for many Sarajevans, the worst was the feeling of isolation, of an international community, especially the West, which reacted too slowly and too late to stop the siege.
That was the major issue or major accuse that the people of Sarajevo were left to the world and to survive on their own and to fight on their own. And I think as an example I could point out the monument here in front of the museum, which shows the food can which was donated during the siege, Ikar can, beef can, done by Bosnian artists, who expresses, I think, in the best way this feeling of loneliness we had. We were given food, we were given humanitarian aid, so to have food to survive, but led to be killed.
The West did eventually react with the NATO bombings that led to the December 95 Dayton Peace Accords, which ended the war. Yet during the conflict, help did come from several thousand foreign soldiers from the Middle East and Afghanistan. Most of them left after '96, but funding from Muslim countries poured in to help rebuild a shattered city and country. Today, some of that aid has been criticized. Countries like Saudi Arabia are said to finance only mosques, Islamic organizations, and schools whose aim is to spread a more extreme version of Islam. Mustafa Zeric has been the Grand Mufti of Bosnia since 1993. He says this is unfair.
What is wrong with influence? We are influenced here by everybody. So you should tell me which of the influences are good for Bosnia and which influences are not good for Bosnia. But I have one experience, of course, and one true that some people have a hard time to accept. If it not were for the Muslim help or for us in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I would not be speaking to you. And I don't accept and don't allow anyone to put us into this moral suicide, to blame those who helped us, and now to run after those who did not help us when it was necessary.
Today, it's estimated that 80% of Sarajevans are of Muslim faith, 1/3 more than before the war. Esad Heshimovic wrote a book about the Mujahideen who came to Bosnia during the war. He says most of them left and they're not a threat. He claims, if anything, it was the collapse of Yugoslavia that opened Bosnia to meeting Muslims with a very different interpretation of Islam.
Some of them asked for purification of Islam in Bosnia because our understanding of Islam was too close to Christian people. And it was also against some beliefs of Islamic missionaries and fighters who came to Bosnia during the war. But it was just a marginal development. A primary reason for our conflict in Bosnia was ethnic conflict and inability of political leaders to make a constitution to share power between different ethnic groups.
Jovan Divjak was a general in the Yugoslav army when the war erupted. Here he shows us where Bosnian Serbs and the Bosnian army fought for control of the city. For Divjak, an ethnic Serb, there was never question of leaving Sarajevo, its people, and the multicultural spirit, which he wrote about in his book, Sarajevo, Mon Amour. His bravery earned him trust and mistrust from both sides.
At the beginning of the war, the Serbs, the Yugoslav army, would have been very happy to arrest me, since I had left that army. For the Serbs, I betrayed them. But for the Bosnian nationalists, they never believed me. Even today, sometimes I hear them say, "Why did he stay? Why didn't he leave?" But I have lived in Sarajevo for 46 years. It is my city. I feel like a citizen of Sarajevo, of Bosnia, and of Europe. A European, a real one.
Svetozar Podaric, an ethnic Serb, also stayed in Sarajevo during the siege. He was wounded by a sniper. Podaric is behind a project to build a monument honoring Sarajevo's Serbian civilians who were killed during the war. He says while the spirit of Sarajevo is not broken, it's wounded, and reconciliation can only come when victims of all sides are remembered. For him, it's the politics that needs to change.
Everything was used to fulfill political goals. So the cultural differences, the religious differences were aimed to divide the society. But that were just excuses, that were just small talks, that was just lies. The greed was the driving force.
Elma Dizdar was a university student during the siege. Today she is a professor. For her, the worst part of the siege were the children who were killed. And today, for her, the worst part is that schools here don't teach about Bosnia's recent past.
Well, actually, they're not taught this part of their history, this particular part of their history, everything that is related to the latest war, to the latest conflict, because it was impossible to reach the consensus about how to teach this to children. Even though I think that, some facts that exist should be taught, that they're facts that children have right to know.
But how to teach a young generation about a war that killed more than 100,000 people? A war driven by ethnic nationalism that has left this country of 4 million people still far from reconciliation.
The division between West and East Germany lasted 40 years. Maybe in 20 years there will be a generation here who will no longer think about the war. A generation which wants to live in Europe and can erase the lines that exist today between the two entities.
This is one of Sarajevo's most powerful memorials. It pays tribute to the 1,500 children who were killed during the siege. Like the city they lived in, they represented different ethnic and religious backgrounds.